So if you're even a little bit of a Lord of the Rings fan, you've probably been seeing or have heard the slew of posts and announcements announcing the new movie coming in 2026. But we actually know a little bit more than you might think about this movie already. I'm Cal and I make a bunch of different content across a bunch of different channels, so feel free to subscribe and come along for one of my many journeys if you wish. So before we get into the cooler and more spicy information, let's just cover the obvious bits that are still cool nonetheless. So first of all, this is going to be a live action movie like the original trilogies, rather than an animated movie like we're expecting later this year in December with the War for Rohirrim. It's going to be a collaboration between New Line Cinema, who you probably recognise, and Warner Brothers, who you also probably recognise. And possibly the coolest part about this project is the Dream Team are going to be back at it again. So whilst he isn't directing and he's producing this time instead, the main man, Peter Jackson, is back in Lord of the Rings business, along with his fellow friends and colleagues from the trilogies, Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens, who will be co-writing the screenplay for the film. So we've got the privilege of seeing the Oscar-winning team straight back into another Lord of the Rings IP, which in my opinion is the best way it could possibly have gone. And not only that, but Andy Serkis, the mocap sensation himself, is going to be directing the movie and starring again as Gollum. And speaking of Gollum, that brings us nicely on to the entire plot and premise of the film that's now been announced by Andy himself as well as other sources. So it's now been confirmed that the working title for the film is The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum. Now I don't know about you, but my immediate reaction to this was being filled with questions and confusion and curiosity about the whole project. Actually no, that's a lie, my initial reaction was more like woo, 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 woo. But then came the questions and curiosities. Obviously the main bulk of the Middle-earth books from Tolkien have already been covered in cinema, whether that be with the original trilogies, with Rings of Power delving into the past, with the War for Rohirrim on the horizon, the slew of games that have been released over the years. We've gone into a lot of the source material, so what's left to cover? That left me thinking, are we going to go off book? Are we going to just delve into the Silmarillion? Are we going to go into some lesser known works from Tolkien covering Middle-earth? Or are we going to delve into a book that's already been covered in the films, but just in more detail on a specific time frame? And that last one is actually exactly what I think they're going to do, and here's why. So basically, the new Lord of the Rings movie that we're so excited about for 2026, it already exists. It didn't get a release in cinema and it had a tiny budget of £3,000 or about $5,000. And this was in 2009. It was a British-made fan film called The Hunt for Gollum. And what was this based on? You guessed it, the Lord of the Rings book. More specifically, the appendices of the book. Filming took place for this in sort of North Wales, Epping Forest, a bunch of places around the UK, again on a tiny budget. Supposedly the director, after making this, Chris Bouchard to be exact, made an agreement with Tolkien Enterprises which allowed him to then release it for free. And I'm guessing the understanding was that he wasn't allowed to make any money on it because he released it for free. And if you do open up the film to watch, it comes with a massive disclaimer at the beginning, basically just saying how it's not for profit and it's completely fan-made. As of 2020, it supposedly had around 15 million views, which is pretty intense for a fan-made film. But I would imagine with the numbers going up as they are right now in terms of, you know, the searches for Hunt for Gollum, they're probably going to get a few more. The important thing to note from this project though is that it was basically the story that we're going to be seeing in 2026, and the setting is basically just laid out for us. We kind of know what to expect now because of this film. It's obviously set in Middle-earth, and more specifically, it's set in the Fellowship of the Ring timeframe. So the movie takes place 17 years after Bilbo's birthday party for his 111th birthday, which you might remember from the beginning of Fellowship, but it also takes place just before Frodo leaves the Shire. And you might be thinking, wow, okay, it was 17 years until Frodo left. And this is a time frame that isn't specifically outlined very clearly in the movies originally from Peter Jackson, because of course to us it just looks like Frodo leaves probably a few days, maybe weeks after the party. Whereas in actual fact, it was apparently almost nearly 2 decades later. Hey, by the way, if you could like the video, it'd be really cool because then I'll know you like it, because I've not made something like this before and I want to know if people like this kind of video. Now back to the time frame. You might have realized, hey, Hunting Gollum actually kind of sounds like it makes a lot of sense now when it's in that kind of timescale. Because if you cast your mind back again to the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, you'll remember that Gollum is actually the person that leaks the information to Sauron about the ring's location being in the hands of a Baggins and at the Shire, with those 2 exact words in fact when he's being tortured. This is why the Ringwraiths travel to the Shire in the movies in the first place, because they know it's there because of Gollum. So as you could probably figure out, the Hunt for Gollum is set before that happens, and it's basically a mission to stop that from happening. Even though we know it does, that was essentially the goal for the Hunt of Gollum. And the fan-made film backs this up even more, because this is basically the exact plot of the short film that they made. So the short film that they made opens with a brief prologue about the ring's disappearance, which is wildly similar and well tuned to like the Peter Jackson openings, which I thought was really cool to see. It then cuts to Aragorn and Gandalf at an inn, which is presumably the Prancing Pony and Bree, of course. Gandalf then basically explains to Aragorn about Gollum having the knowledge of the ring and needing to hunt him down, essentially to stop that getting into the hands of Sauron. Aragorn, being Aragorn, then takes it upon himself to set off on a hunt to find Gollum. And after not finding him at first, Aragorn then crosses path with a fellow ranger and a distant kinsman named Arafir, who is another ranger, and specifically the Ranger of the North. When he meets this ranger, he then tells Aragorn about rumours of a creature that's been stealing fish from open windows in the local villages, which is of course pretty on brand for our fishy little friend. And this other ranger could end up being something we see in the films that Andy Serkis makes, because of course it would make sense if that is someone that exists in the book. I just think it's kind of cool that we might see another ranger in the movies. Aragorn then in the fan film eventually leaves the ranger and kills some orc scouts in the forest. He finds Gollum in the end by a fish pond and captures him in a snare trap, and then he sets out for Mirkwood carrying Gollum in a sack. On the way he spots one of the ringwraiths in the woods, but he manages to avoid it just about, and later that day he gets attacked by another set of orcs. This time it's a bigger squad. The original battle was just with 2 orcs, and ultimately he defeats these orcs, but he does get hit with a poison arrow just as he's sort of smiting down the last orc in the squad. He ends up collapsing next to some flowers and has kind of a bit of a vision of Arwen, which was pretty cool as she's in Rivendell. But unfortunately, when he does recover and it's around dusk kind of time now, he notices that Gollum has managed to slip away. He does go after Gollum again deep into the night and eventually does come across him again because he's hiding up a tree. Again, kind of on brand for our gangly little friend. And whilst in the tree, Gollum kind of is very scared and explains that there is a ringwraith coming. A few seconds later, lo and behold, he was telling the truth. A ringwraith appears and starts to attack Aragorn, and after a short but quite intense fight, honestly, he does basically flee because there's a elven light coming from the elves of Mirkwood. They ultimately help Aragorn recapture Gollum and guide him back to the fortress. The fan film then cuts to Gandalf emerging from the dungeons in Mirkwood after interrogating Gollum down there, and he then tells Aragorn that Gollum does know of Bilbo Baggins and he does know of the Shire. That information's already been passed on, and that he now must go to warn Frodo in the Shire. Aragorn then suggests sending Frodo to meet him in Bree, and Gandalf agrees to do that, which of course then goes on to happen in Fellowship of the Ring. And then the fan film ends with a pretty cool scene of Gollum speaking to himself in the dungeon, where he's vowing to himself to kill all the Bagginses and to reclaim his precious, which is again, of course, the driving motivation of Gollum throughout the entire Peter Jackson trilogy. So overall, if they've done an accurate job in that fan film, which I'm sure they have, it was a very passionate project and I'd wholeheartedly recommend watching it. I was super impressed. It's about 40 minutes long, it's free, you can watch it on IMDb or various other sites. But if they are accurate and it does follow the books, and Andy Serkis is planning on doing that too, it looks like that's going to be the story. We're most likely going to see a plot line that deep dives into the time between Bilbo Baggins' birthday and Frodo leaving the Shire to go to Rivendell. Bear in mind as well that this was only a 40-minute fan film, whereas this is going to be a feature-length film that we're getting in 2026. So they might have more time to flesh out the plot, do more about Gandalf's whereabouts, do a little bit more on the potential of Sauron and his ringwraiths, maybe some deeper lore in those areas, and just some general lore on all that Fellowship level goodness that we just fell in love with the trilogy because of. And although this is nothing revolutionary in terms of plot, given that we know the hunt for Gollum is ultimately fruitless with stopping Sauron from knowing the ring's location in the end anyway, I'm personally all for it. Like, expanding the cinematic coverage and getting some more deep lore about Middle-earth, especially surrounding the characters we already know and love, just sounds great to me. Let me know what you think though. I think this is most likely going to be the plotline for the movie, but it could be something set completely prior that covers Gollum between finding the ring of Smeagol and then the start of Fellowship. Who knows? I personally hope to see at least a slightly deeper dive back into the practical effect based goodness of the original trilogy, especially seeing Peter Jackson back in that role as a producer. Obviously seeing some of the original cast back is going to be great. Andy Serkis being a part of the project. I'd love to see Ian McKellen back as Gandalf. I don't know about Aragorn with Viggo though, because he is looking a little bit older. But honestly, just seeing some Tolkien Middle-earth goodness back on the big screen is just great within itself. Hopefully you found this interesting or fun. I'd love it if you wanted to leave a comment and just discuss the movie, your theories about this, anything Lord of the Rings or anything at all really. Especially because I was super unsure about making a video like this and I was beating myself up about it a lot. I wish I was more confident, but then I remembered something.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.